You are editing your personality, biting your tongue, and shrinking your ambitions just to make sure people you do not even respect feel comfortable. You are exhausted from performing a version of yourself that fits into their limited worldview. As long as your confidence is tied to their approval, you will never build a life you are actually capable of. There is a quiet exhaustion that doesn't come from hard work. It comes from constant self-editing. You wake up already negotiating what to say, what not to say, how to phrase something so it doesn't sound too much, how to hold back just enough so no one feels uncomfortable. And the strange part is no one told you to do this. But you do it anyway. At work, you sit in a meeting and hear an idea you know is flawed. You feel it immediately. You see the gap. But instead of speaking, you soften your words. You dilute the truth. Or worse, you say nothing. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you are calculating the emotional cost of being honest. Will they think I'm difficult? Will this create tension? Is it worth it? So you stay quiet. And in that moment, something small happens that you barely notice. You abandon yourself. This doesn't happen once. It happens dozens of times a day. You say yes when your schedule is already overloaded. You reply to messages you don't have the energy for. You agree to plans you don't even want to attend. And each time, it feels like a small compromise. Manageable, temporary. But it accumulates. Let me give you a simple scene. It's late evening. You're already mentally drained from a full day of shallow tasks, constant notifications, and half-finished thoughts. You finally sit down, maybe with the intention to rest or to focus on something meaningful. Then your phone lights up. A message, a request, something small. You hesitate for half a second. You know you don't want to engage, but you respond anyway, because ignoring it feels uncomfortable, because you don't want to seem rude, because it's easier to comply than to hold a boundary. 30 minutes later, you're still on your phone, scrolling, replying, reacting, and when you finally stop, you feel even more exhausted than before, not because of what you did, but because none of it was intentional. Think about that. How much of your day is actually chosen, and how much is subtly negotiated through the expectations of others? This is where the resentment begins. Not loud, not explosive, quiet, internal, persistent. You start to feel like people are asking too much from you, like your time is constantly being taken, like no one really understands how stretched you are. But if you look closely most of the time, no one is forcing you. You are volunteering your energy in exchange for temporary emotional comfort. And over time, that trade becomes expensive. Because the more you say yes to things that don't align, the less clarity you have about what actually matters to you. Your identity starts to blur. You become adaptable in every environment but grounded in none. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a decision that disappointed someone else but was completely aligned with yourself? Not justified, not explained, just chosen. For many people, that moment is hard to remember because somewhere along the way, being easy to work with, being liked, being considered a good person quietly replaced being truthful. And the cost of that is not obvious at first. You don't lose everything overnight. You just feel off, slightly disconnected from your own direction, mentally tired even on days when you didn't do anything meaningful, constantly busy but rarely fulfilled. This is a paradox. You are doing more for others than ever before, but feeling less like yourself than ever before. And here is where it becomes dangerous, because the world rewards this behavior in the short term. People appreciate you. They rely on you. They describe you as dependable, flexible, easy. But underneath that, there is a quiet erosion happening. Your standards are lowering. Your voice is weakening. Your time is no longer yours. And eventually, you reach a point where you don't even ask, "What do I want?" You ask, we'll keep everything smooth. That is not alignment. That is survival mode disguised as maturity. And most people never question it. They call it responsibility. They call it professionalism. They call it being a good partner, a good friend, a good colleague. But if it comes at the cost of your clarity, your energy, and your direction, it is not sustainable. It is slow self-erasure. So the real question is not whether you are capable of more. It's this: are you living your life? Or are you carefully managing other people's expectations of you? And if those two things are not the same, how long do you think you can keep this up before something starts to break? What you are experiencing is not a personality flaw. It is not a lack of confidence. And it is definitely not because you are too nice. It is a biological mismatch. Your brain is operating on ancient code. In a completely modern environment, for most of human history, survival depended on one thing: staying in the tribe. If you were accepted, you lived. If you were rejected, you were exposed to hunger, to danger, to death. So your brain evolved to treat social rejection as a serious threat, not discomfort, not inconvenience. Threat. That wiring never disappeared. It just adapted. Today, you are not being exiled into the wilderness. You are sitting in an air-conditioned office, answering emails, navigating meetings, responding to messages. But your brain doesn't fully recognize the difference. An awkward silence in a meeting, a delayed reply from someone important, a slight shift in tone from a colleague. Your nervous system reacts as if something is wrong. And this is where everything begins. Because the moment your brain detects even a hint of social tension, it starts searching for a way to resolve it. Fast. Not correctly. Not strategically. Just quickly. So you adjust. You soften your opinion. You agree when you don't fully agree. You over-explain to make sure no one misinterprets you. You take on responsibility to avoid disappointing someone. And when the tension disappears, even slightly, your brain rewards you. A small sense of relief, a release of pressure. That is dopamine, not the loud, addictive kind you get from entertainment, but a subtle, reinforcing signal that says, this worked. Do it again. And over time, this becomes a loop. You feel discomfort, you adjust your behavior. Discomfort goes away, you get rewarded. Again and again, until eventually you don't even realize you're doing it. You call it being professional. You call it being kind. You call it being cooperative. But if we look at it clearly, it is a conditioned response to avoid emotional friction. Let me ask you something. When you agree to something you don't actually want to do, are you doing it because it is the right decision, or because you want to remove the discomfort of saying no? That distinction matters more than most people realize, because one is intentional, the other is reactive. And the more your life is built on reactive decisions, the less control you actually have. This is where another layer comes in. Modern life has amplified the system. You are no longer dealing with a small tribe of 50 to 100 people. You are exposed to hundreds, sometimes thousands, of micro-judgments every day. Emails, messages, social media, performance reviews, subtle comparisons. Each one is an opportunity for validation or perceived rejection. And every time you get a signal of approval, a positive reply, a compliment, a like, your brain reinforces the behavior that led to it. This is dopamine conditioning at scale. You begin to associate your value with how people respond to you, not with what you are building, not with what you believe, not with the standards you hold, but with external feedback. And here's the problem. External feedback is unstable. It changes based on mood, context, bias, expectation, and countless variables you cannot control. So if your sense of worth is tied to something unstable, you become unstable. Emotionally, mentally, behaviorally. Some days you feel confident. Other days, you question everything, not because you changed, but because the feedback changed. Think about how fragile that makes your identity. Now layer in cognitive load. Every time you filter your thoughts before speaking, every time you rehearse a message to make sure it sounds right, every time you second-guess how something will be perceived, you are consuming mental energy. Your brain is running background calculations all day. How will this land? What will they think? Should I say it this way instead? That constant monitoring is expensive. It fragments your attention. It reduces clarity. It creates decision fatigue. And by the end of the day, you feel exhausted not because you did something meaningful, but because you spent the entire day managing perception. This is why so many people feel tired without being productive. Their energy is not going into creation. It is going into self-protection. And this is the part most people never confront. You are not just seeking approval. You are dependent on it because it regulates your internal state. It tells you whether you are okay or not. And the moment you give that responsibility to other people, you lose authority over your own life. So let's strip away the illusion. This is not about being a good person. This is not about being easy to work with. This is about fear, a quiet, socially acceptable fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or disliked. And until you see it clearly, you will continue to justify it. You will call it humility. You will call it patience. You will call it emotional intelligence. But underneath all of those labels, the mechanism is the same. Avoid discomfort. Maintain approval. Repeat. And here's the truth most people avoid. If your decisions are driven by the need to be accepted, then your life is being shaped by people who are not responsible for the outcome. Think about that. You are handing control of your direction to individuals who do not carry the consequences of your choices. So the real question becomes, if you remove the fear of disapproval, how differently would you speak, act, and decide? And more importantly, what kind of life would that version of you be able to build? There is a pattern you will start to notice once you study people who operate at a high level. They are not universally liked. In fact, many of them are misunderstood, criticized, even quietly disliked by the people around them. And one of the clearest examples of this is Steve Jobs, not the polished version you see in keynote presentations, but the real operator behind the scenes. Jobs was not known for being agreeable. He was not known for making people comfortable. And he certainly was not optimizing for approval. He was optimizing for clarity. And that difference changes everything. Inside Apple, Jobs was often described as intense, demanding, and at times difficult. He would reject ideas bluntly. He would push teams beyond what they thought was reasonable. He would say no repeatedly, decisively, without softening it. From the outside, that behavior can look excessive, but from a performance perspective, it was precise. Because Jobs understood something most people avoid. Every time you compromise your standard to maintain comfort, you dilute the outcome. Think about the pressure he was under. Shareholders, media, internal teams, market expectations. There were constant signals pushing him towards safer decisions, more consensus-driven choices, more acceptable directions. And it would have been easy, even praised, for him to follow that path, to make products that everyone slightly liked, instead of products that redefine categories. But he didn't. He filtered everything through one question. Is this excellent? Not, will people approve of this? Not, will this avoid criticism? Just, is this right? And when the answer was no, he rejected it, even if it created tension, even if it disappointed people, even if it made him unpopular in the moment. Let me ask you something. How often do you lower your standard just enough to keep things smooth, just enough to avoid friction, just enough so no one pushes back? Jobs moved in the opposite direction. He increased friction intentionally, because he understood that clarity requires resistance. If no one is pushing back on your decisions, you are probably not operating at a level that demands anything from them. There is a story often told about his product reviews. Engineers would spend weeks, sometimes months, developing features they believed were ready. They would present them with confidence, expectation, even pride. And Jobs would look at it, pause, and say, "No, this isn't good enough." Not with hesitation, not with apology, just certainty. And then he would dismantle the idea. For many people, that kind of response feels harsh, unnecessary, even demoralizing. But here's what most people miss. He wasn't rejecting the person. He was rejecting the standard. There's a difference. But you can only operate that way when your decisions are not tied to being liked. Because the moment you need approval, you hesitate. You soften feedback. You delay decisions. You allow things to pass that you know should be corrected. And over time, those small compromises accumulate, not dramatically, but consistently, until the entire system drifts away from excellence. Jobs refused that drift. He was willing to be misunderstood in the short term to achieve precision in the long term. And that is the part most people are not prepared for. Because we like the outcome. We admire the products, the innovation, the clarity of vision. But we are uncomfortable with the process that creates those results. Directness, discomfort, disapproval. So we try to separate them. We want high standards without tension. We want respect without risk. We want to lead without being questioned or disliked. That combination does not exist. At some point, you have to decide, do you want consensus or do you want clarity? Because you rarely get both at the same time. Jobs chose clarity. And the cost of that choice was that not everyone liked him. But here is the trade-off. He built something that mattered, something precise, something intentional, something that reflected a clear standard. Now compare that to a life driven by approval. Decisions are delayed. Standards are negotiated. Direction is constantly adjusted based on external reaction. Nothing is fully yours. It is co-authored by the expectations of everyone around you. So let me ask you directly, are you trying to build something meaningful, or are you trying to be perceived positively while doing it? Because those two goals will eventually collide. And when they do, your choice will reveal your standard. Jobs made his choice early. He accepted that being exceptional means being misunderstood, that being precise means saying no more often than yes, and that being respected often requires being disliked first. The question is, are you willing to pay that price? There's a system running your behavior. Quiet, automatic, highly efficient. Most people never see it. They only feel the effects. Stress, overcommitment, mental fatigue, a constant sense of being slightly out of alignment. But underneath all of that, there's a loop. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. It begins with a trigger, not something dramatic, something ordinary. An email appears, a message comes in, a colleague asks for a quick favor. Someone's tone shifts slightly in conversation. Nothing dangerous, but your brain flags it anyway. Potential tension. And this is where the system activates. Immediately, there's a craving, not for the task itself, not for the conversation, but for resolution. You want the interaction to feel smooth. You want to avoid friction. You want to return to a state where everything feels. Okay, that craving is subtle but powerful because it doesn't present itself as fear. It presents itself as responsibility. I should respond. I should help. I should clarify. So you move into the response. You say yes. You reply immediately. You adjust your tone. You explain more than necessary. You take on something that wasn't yours to carry. And the moment you do, something shifts internally. Relief. The tension disappears. The interaction feels resolved. The discomfort is gone. That relief is a reward, and your brain registers it instantly. This worked, so it wires the pattern. Trigger, craving, response, reward. Again, and again, and again, until it becomes automatic. Let me give you a simple scene. You sit down to focus. Finally, you have something important to work on, something that actually matters. It requires attention, depth, thinking. 2 minutes in, your phone lights up. You see the notification. You tell yourself, I'll just check quickly. That's the trigger. The craving is not curiosity. It's tension. What if it's important? What if someone is waiting? What if ignoring it creates friction? So you check. You respond. Maybe it turns into a short exchange. Maybe you scroll for a moment longer than you intended. And when you put the phone down, you feel a small sense of relief. You handled it. No loose ends. No discomfort. That is the reward. But something else just happened. Your focus is broken. Your cognitive state is fragmented. And the cost of returning to deep work just increased. This is where it becomes dangerous. Because the brain does not measure long-term outcomes. It reinforces immediate relief. So even though that behavior just made your work harder, your brain still labels it as correct. And over time, this loop scales, not just with your phone, with everything, work requests, social interactions, family dynamics, even your internal dialogue. You start anticipating triggers before they even happen. You pre-adjust. You soften your opinions before speaking. You over-prepare explanations. You rehearse conversations in your head. Why? Because you are trying to control the outcome in advance. You are trying to eliminate the possibility of disapproval. But that level of monitoring comes at a cost. Cognitive load. Every decision takes more effort. Every interaction requires more processing. Every moment is filtered through the question, how will this be received? That question seems harmless, but when it runs in the background, all day it drains you. This is why you can end the day feeling exhausted without having done anything meaningful. Your energy was not used to build. It was used to regulate perception. Now layer in another truth. The reward you are chasing, approval, is unstable. It changes based on people's moods, expectation biases, and limitations. So the system you're relying on has no consistent output. Some days you get positive feedback. You feel good, grounded, confident. Other days, the response is neutral or absent. And suddenly, you start questioning yourself. Was that the right decision? Did I say something wrong? Should I have handled it differently? Nothing actually changed. Only the feedback did. And because your internal state is tied to that feedback, your stability disappears with it. Let me ask you something. If your mood can be altered by the tone of someone else's reply who is actually in control, this is the hidden cost of the loop. It doesn't just shape your behavior. It shapes your identity. You become reactive, not in obvious ways, but in subtle, constant adjustments. You are no longer acting from a clear center. You are adapting in real time to maintain approval. And the more you do this, the weaker your internal reference becomes, until eventually you need external signals just to feel oriented. That is dependency, not dramatic, but deeply ingrained. And this is why breaking the loop feels uncomfortable. Because when you remove the response, when you don't immediately say yes, when you don't smooth things over, when you allow tension to exist, there is no immediate reward. There is only discomfort, silence, uncertainty, a slight increase in internal pressure. Most people interpret that as a sign that something is wrong, so they return to the loop. They resolve the tension. They get the relief. They reinforce the pattern. But the people who operate at a higher level understand something different. That discomfort is not danger. It is the absence of conditioning. It is a space where a new standard can be built, and this is a shift from reacting to triggers to observing them, from chasing relief to choosing alignment, from outsourcing your value to defining it internally. But that shift requires awareness, because if you cannot see the loop, you cannot interrupt it. So the next time you feel that subtle pressure to respond, to agree, to adjust, pause just for a moment and ask yourself, am I doing this to move my life forward or to remove a feeling I don't want to sit with? Because your answer to that question is shaping your entire trajectory. Awareness is not enough. You can understand the loop. You can see the pattern. You can even recognize it in real time and still do nothing differently. Because insight without structure does not change behavior. What you need is a protocol, not motivation, not intention. A system you can rely on when your emotions are not aligned with your standards. This is what we call the boundary defense protocol. It is not about becoming cold. It is not about rejecting people. It is about reclaiming authorship over your time, your energy, and your decisions. And it begins here. Step 1, relationship audit. See clearly who costs you. Most people do not have a boundary problem. They have a clarity problem. They do not know which relationships require boundaries because they have never evaluated them honestly. So everything feels equal. Every request feels valid. Every interaction feels like it deserves your attention. But that is not reality. Some relationships expand you. Others slowly drain you. And if you cannot tell the difference, you will treat both the same, which means you will give your best energy to the wrong places. So here's what you do. You start observing, not reacting. After each meaningful interaction, ask yourself one simple question. Did this interaction leave me clearer or more depleted? Not morally, not socially, energetically. Pay attention to your internal state, because your body often tells the truth before your mind is willing to admit it. There are people you feel lighter around, more focused, more honest, more direct, and there are people who create subtle tension. You rehearse what to say before seeing them. You feel the need to manage their reactions. You leave the interaction slightly drained. That is data, not judgment, not accusation, just information. And here is where most people make a mistake. They ignore that data because the relationship has history, time invested, shared experiences, social expectations. But history does not justify misalignment. Let me ask you something. How many of your current obligations exist only because you never question them? If you were designing your life from scratch today, who would still have access to your time? That question is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because until you see clearly who is aligned with your direction, you will continue distributing your energy based on habit, not intention. Step 2, define core values. What is non-negotiable boundaries? Without values feel arbitrary, inconsistent, difficult to enforce. Because if you do not know what you are protecting, you will not protect it when it matters. So before you start saying no to others, you need to say yes to something specific. Your standards, not vague ideas, not general preferences. Clear, non-negotiable principles that define how you operate. For example, time autonomy. You decide how your time is allocated, not urgency from others. Cognitive clarity. You protect your focus from unnecessary interruptions. Integrity. You do not agree with things that violate your thinking just to maintain harmony. These are not slogans. They are filters. Every request, every interaction, every decision passes through them. And if something violates those standards, the answer is already decided. This removes friction, because now you are not negotiating in the moment. You are executing a predefined system. And this is critical, Because most people fail at boundaries not because they lack courage, but because they decide in real time, under pressure, under emotion, under social expectation. That is the worst possible environment for clear thinking. So you decide in advance. Let me ask you directly, what are you unwilling to sacrifice anymore? Your time? Your attention? Your honesty? If you cannot answer that, clearly you will continue trading them away for temporary comfort. Step 3. The calm no. Remove emotion from rejection. This is where everything becomes real. Because understanding boundaries is easy. Expressing them is not. Most people struggle here for one reason. They attach emotion to the word no. They think it needs to be justified, softened, explained. So instead of saying, I won't be able to take this on, they say, I'm really sorry. Things are just a bit busy right now. Maybe I can try later. That is not a boundary. That is a negotiation. And negotiations invite pressure. The more you explain, the more space you give the other person to push back. So the shift is simple. Remove excess language. Keep it clean. Calm. Neutral. I'm not available for that. I won't be able to commit to this. That doesn't work for me. No apology layered with justification. No over-explanation. Just clarity. And here is what you need to understand. The discomfort you feel after saying no is not a signal that you did something wrong. It is a signal that you are breaking a pattern. Your brain is used to resolving tension immediately. Now you are allowing it to exist. That feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean incorrect. Think about that. Step 4, the delay mechanism. Create space before response. The loop we talked about earlier depends on speed. Trigger immediate response. That is what keeps it alive. So one of the most powerful interventions is to slow it down, not dramatically, just enough to interrupt the automatic pattern. Instead of responding instantly, you pause, even if it's for a few minutes, sometimes a few hours. You create space between the request and your decision. And in that space, something changes. Your emotional reaction settles. Your cognitive control returns. You move from impulse to intention. This is not about ignoring people. It is about refusing to operate on immediate pressure. Because urgency is often artificial. Other people's priorities are not automatically your responsibility. So you give yourself time. You consider, does this align with my values? Does this deserve my energy? What is the real cost of saying yes? Most people never ask those questions. They just respond. And then they deal with the consequences later. You are reversing that. You deal with the thinking first. Then you act. Step 5, discomfort training. Build tolerance for tension. This is the part that determines everything. Because no framework works if you cannot handle discomfort. And setting boundaries will create discomfort, not always externally, but internally. You will feel tension in your body, a pull to explain yourself, an urge to fix the situation quickly. That is your conditioning reacting. So instead of avoiding that feeling, you train with it. You let a message sit unanswered for a little longer. You allow someone to be slightly disappointed. You resist the urge to immediately smooth things over. Not aggressively, not disrespectfully, but intentionally. You expose yourself to small doses of social discomfort. And over time, something shifts. Your tolerance increases. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable, then neutral, then irrelevant. This is neuroplasticity in action. You are rewiring your response to tension from discomfort equals danger, fix it immediately, to discomfort equals signal, observe, decide, act deliberately, and that changes your entire behavior. Because now you are no longer controlled by the need to feel comfortable. You are guided by what is aligned. There is one thing you need to understand clearly. This protocol will not make everyone like you. In fact, it may do the opposite. Some people will resist it. Some will test your boundaries. Some will quietly step back. That is not failure. That is filtration. You are no longer available for dynamics that require you to shrink, and that will naturally change who remains in your environment. So the goal is not to be accepted by everyone. The goal is to become precise about where your energy goes, because once that becomes clear, everything else follows. Your time expands. Your focus sharpens. Your decisions become cleaner. And most importantly, you stop negotiating your life with people who are not responsible for it. Slow down for a moment, not to understand, but to confront. Because everything we've discussed up to this point doesn't matter if you're not willing to look at your life honestly. No analysis, no justification, just clarity. Let me ask you something. If someone observed your life for the past 30 days, your conversations, your decisions, your use of time, would they conclude that you are living by your own standards or adapting other people's expectations? Sit with that, because most people don't notice the drift. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly. One small compromise. One avoided conversation. One yes, that should have been a no. And over time, those moments accumulate into a pattern where your life looks acceptable from the outside, but feels misaligned on the inside. You meet your responsibilities. You show up. You function. But there's a quiet tension underneath it all. A sense that something is being held back. Something unexpressed, unbuilt, unclaimed. Now ask yourself this. What are you not saying that needs to be said? Not aggressively, not impulsively, but truthfully. What conversations are you avoiding because you already know they will create discomfort? And more importantly, what is that avoidance costing you? Because there is always a cost. Clarity delayed, decisions postponed, standards lowered. You don't pay for it immediately. You pay for it gradually, in lost time, in diluted direction, in opportunities that quietly disappear because you never fully showed up as yourself. Think about your work. Are you doing what actually matters or what keeps things smooth? Are you building something intentional or maintaining something acceptable? There is a difference, and most people live in that gap for years. Now shift to your relationships. Who in your life knows the real version of you? Not the agreeable version, not the filtered version. The real one, the one that has clear opinions, clear boundaries, clear standards. Or are you adjusting so often that no one ever actually meets you? Because if that's the case, you are not being accepted. You are being tolerated in a version that is easier to handle. And that is a very different thing. Let that land. Now go deeper. If you continue like this, same patterns, same responses, same adjustments, where does this lead? 5 years, 10 years, a life where you are well-liked but internally disconnected, a life where you avoided conflict but also avoided growth, a life where everything looks stable but nothing feels fully yours. This is not dramatic. This is common, and that is what makes it dangerous, because it feels normal until one day you realize you've built a life around comfort instead of truth. So here's the question that matters most, the one most people avoid until it's too late. If you reach the end of your life universally liked, but you never pursue what you actually wanted, never express what you actually believe, never built what you were actually capable of, did you win? Or did you just avoid losing approval? There is no easy way to answer that, because answering it honestly forces a decision. You cannot unsee this. Once you recognize a pattern, you either continue it or you interrupt it. And interruption comes with a cost. Discomfort, misunderstanding, possibly even rejection. But clarity always does. So now the question becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. What is more expensive to you? The discomfort of being honest, or the regret of never being fully yourself? Because one of those will define your life. And you are already choosing whether you admit it or not. At this point, you understand the pattern. You see the loop. You recognize the cost. You know exactly where you are compromising. So now, there is no confusion left, only a decision, because awareness creates responsibility. And once you see clearly how often you are trading your time, your energy, your voice for the comfort of being accepted, you can no longer pretend it's accidental. It's a choice, repeated, daily, quiet. And here's the part most people avoid. Nothing will change until you are willing to tolerate being misunderstood. Not once, not occasionally, consistently. Because the moment you stop over-explaining, people will notice. The moment you stop saying yes, people will question it. The moment you stop adjusting yourself to fit their expectations, some will feel uncomfortable. Not because you are wrong, but because you are no longer predictable. You're no longer easy. And for many people, your convenience was a foundation of the relationship. So when that disappears, the dynamic changes. Let me be direct. If your current identity is built on being agreeable, then becoming disciplined will feel like losing something. You will feel friction, internally and externally. There will be moments where you want to go back, to soften, to explain more, to make things easier again. That is the test. Not whether you understand this, but whether you can hold your standard when it creates tension. Because discipline is not intensity. It is consistency under pressure. It is the ability to act in alignment, even when your emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. And this is where self-respect is built, not in comfort, not in validation, but in those quiet moments where you choose not to abandon yourself, where you say no without needing to be understood, where you hold your position without needing approval, where you allow someone else's reaction to exist without making it your responsibility to fix. That is power, not loud, not visible, but stable. And once you experience that stability, something shifts. You stop scanning the room for approval. You stop rehearsing every interaction. You stop negotiating your value in real time. You become grounded, clear, difficult to move, not because you are rigid, but because you are defined. And defined people operate differently. They don't ask, what will make this comfortable? They ask what is correct. They don't prioritize being liked. They prioritize being aligned. And over time, that compounds. Your decisions become sharper. Your time becomes protected. Your relationships become more honest. Some will fall away. That is not a loss. That is alignment revealing itself. Because the goal was never to be accepted by everyone. The goal was to build a life that is actually yours. So here's where it ends. Not with motivation. Not with inspiration. With a standard. From this point forward, you have two options. Continue adjusting yourself to maintain approval. Or start defining your life based on what you know is right. One path is easier in the moment. The other is stronger over time. But you do not get both. So decide. Not later. Not when it's convenient. Now. Because every day you delay this, you reinforce the same pattern. And every time you reinforce it, it becomes harder to break. This is not about becoming someone new. It is about removing what is not you. The performance, the hesitation, the dependency. And what remains is something most people never fully access. Clarity, ownership, self-respect. And once you have that, you no longer need permission to live the way you were meant to.